Welcome to Easy Peasy Content. This is 6 ways to help you save 5+ hours creating your content every single week. If we have never met, hello, I am Crystal Proffitt. I'm a content strategist, and I like to help people create their content with confidence. So first, we're going to talk about your content. Whether you're creating a podcast episode, a YouTube video, or your blog content, you need to understand that not all tasks are created equal. And we're going to break down the different priorities that we have. So here's a great example. The checklist for my solo podcast episodes, which is what you see here, are very different than what I have for my YouTube video. So this is an example of a checklist in ASANA versus just having everything in a Google Doc or a PDF form. So some of these things can be batched together while others require being in a totally different mindset. I show up differently to create a YouTube video than I do a podcast. It's just how my brain works. And so I wanted to show you the actual behind the scenes of comparing my podcast versus my YouTube versus my blog priorities. So we're going to talk about priorities very much in here. So my podcast priorities. So I'm showing you the back end of my BuzzSPROUT. This is the platform that I've used since 2018 to host my podcast. And these are all the different fields that you have to fill out before you actually have a podcast episode published. So my podcast priorities are, I have to have an actual episode recorded and uploaded in order to even have a podcast. In order for a podcast to exist, I have to have an audio file, right? So that is obviously a priority. From there, I really look at the episode title and the description and very basic marketing. And that's it. Did you hear me say I spent hours and hours on editing or hours and hours on, making the perfect transcript or making sure that everything is perfect? No, that is not what I do in my content. I do the things that matter the most. And then if I have extra time, I'll go in there and tweak some of the other stuff. But where I see a lot of people spending a lot of time is in the editing. Now we're going to talk about YouTube. So YouTube priorities, what I plan on doing is I will spend time recording the video, right? Because you have to have a video. You have to have the video file in order to have a YouTube channel. Then I work on my title, the description. I work on my thumbnails because you got to have something visual to put on there for YouTube. Then I work on the SEO. Now, SEO is different for podcast than it is for YouTube, and I treat it that way. I spend more time on SEO for YouTube than I do for my podcast because unfortunately, it's just not all created equal. I said that earlier, but I do think it's important to have the most specific things to those platforms that are going to make the most difference. And another thing is I work on some marketing for YouTube, but I don't spend hours and hours and hours marketing. I will spend time creating short clips to share what I've already created. And then from there, we have the blog priorities. So blogging priorities look very different than all the other ones because, again, you have to have the written draft. This is where I spend time. This is where Google Drive and Google Sheets come back in because I'm writing everything, or sorry, Google Docs, not Google Sheets for my blog post. But I will write the draft. Then from there, I title everything, make sure it's SEO friendly, and I will work on SEO for my blog post higher above and beyond what I do for just my podcast episodes. Then I look at relevant resources that I can add in there. I create easy to remember URLs, not only for my audience, but for me. That way, if someone asks me about a specific podcast episode, I can tell you, oh, it's this episode number. Go to crystalproffitt.com/episode 373. It's very easy to remember. And then I also keep my marketing very simple, but marketing is a priority. If marketing is not a priority for you right now, we have to think about what can we replace with marketing. Like there's something in there that we can like probably shift down in the priority list and make it happen. But by keeping all of these tasks super simple, you can easily cut down on 2 or more hours per week just by looking at all the tasks that you're doing and putting priorities on each and every one of them. Now, let's talk about the second way that you can save time in your content. Email. Everyone loves to hate writing emails. They do. But it's one of those tricky things that people just, they love to hate it. And it really holds creators up when you have writer's block or you don't know what to say or you're overthinking your content or the publish date creeps up on you and you don't have anything planned. You're like, I was supposed to write something for Friday's email, but it's Friday morning and I don't have anything. Like I've seen this happen time and time again. But let's look at the email priorities that actually matter most. So for email, the top priorities that I always have is I like to plan the topic. Again, you can do this in a Google Sheet or you could do this in Asana. I write my draft in Google Docs. This is what you can see here. I have a Google Docs draft version. Then I decide on the CTA or call to action for that email. Then I write a title for what this is going to be. So if you've ever read any of my emails, I do not do the title first. I see a lot of people get stuck. They're like, I don't even know how to get started with my email. And I'm like, well, don't try to title it first. That's where I would get stuck too. And it's like, oh, it gets a lot easier if you don't try to title things first, you do that last. And by simplifying this process, you can save 30 minutes to an hour every single week. Now let's move on to the third way you can save time creating content. So we're going to move into social posts. So Cheryl said earlier, I'm good with email. I don't like social. I feel like it sucks up so much time. Yes, I don't think you're alone in feeling that way, Cheryl, either. And we're going to talk about where creators waste so much time with comparison and feeling the need to always be on or needing to be on all the platforms. Like it is a touchy subject whenever you start talking about social media. So I wanted to share with you some of the priorities that I've set for my social media. So Instagram posts. Instagram is the place that I like to hang out. And so what I do is I'll talk about my content on Instagram. I try not to copy and paste like everything exactly how it is from like Instagram to Facebook to LinkedIn or any other platforms, but I do talk about my content on Instagram. And then for my Facebook group, this was really meant for connection and engagement. It's a place for me to have feedback from my audience and actually answer their questions and talk to them on a regular basis. And a few more tips for cutting down time spending on social media is repurposing your content. So show up where it matters and don't try to be on all the platforms all the time. You can easily do this. You can save 2 or more hours when you repurpose your content to your social platforms and show up only where it matters. So now let's talk about the fourth way you can save time on your content. And it's really taking everything that we just learned and rolling it all together. So we're going to talk about prioritizing and consistency. Now that we've discussed specific aspects of your content priorities, whether it's your podcast, your YouTube, social, email, all of those, I want to ask, what's keeping you from being consistent today? If this is something you're struggling with, then you can tell us in the comments. You don't have to. If you're feeling brave and you're willing to be vulnerable here with us today, you can tell me in the comments what comes to mind when you think about why you haven't been consistent with your content. Because I know I felt pressured and overwhelmed by perfectionism in the past. It's been the thing that held me back from being consistent, and it stopped me for a long time. But I have a suggestion. If it is not a priority. If you're looking and thinking about all the priorities we just talked about, if any of those tasks don't fall under a priority, I challenge you, don't do them for 1 month and see how it impacts your content. Oh, somebody just got really uncomfortable. I'm going to come back on for a second. This makes people like, this is when I get into the training and people are like, ooh, get a little squirmy in their chair. They're like, wait, what? What did she just say? Yeah. If there is something holding you back in your content today, right now, and it is the thing that is keeping you from being consistent, I challenge you, don't do that one task or multiple tasks for 30 days and see what happens. And I've told this story before, but I have good friends that have come to me and they're like, Crystal, I hate my show notes. I hate my show notes. I don't like putting them on my website. They freak me out. It takes me so long. I'm overly critical. I'm blah, 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 blah. Like they just like, so I don't end up doing my podcast because I don't look forward to doing my show notes. And I tell them, don't do your show notes. And they look at me like, you're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to tell me I'm not supposed to do my show notes. And I say, well, look, I want you to create your content. Would I love for you to have your podcast in your show notes? Yes, absolutely. But if it's the thing holding you back from creating your podcast altogether, don't do it and see what happens. Just let it go for a month and see what happens. And it's been pretty life-changing for a lot of podcasters. And then they're like, you know what? I found another way to share this useful information with my audience. Or I found something like they have these creative bursts of energy because they didn't realize this one task was holding them back. It was holding so much mental space for keeping them from doing other things. And they're like, oh my gosh, what a relief. So I challenge you, like I'm throwing down the gauntlet. You can accept the challenge or not, but don't do some of those tasks that are no longer priorities for your content. And then let's see what happens. But if you do that, you could save an hour and a half or more a week if you take away the things that are no longer a priority. So now let's move into way number 5 to save you some time. One theme for the week. All right. I want you to work smarter, not harder, because this way you're only planning content once and then you'll be able to reuse it and repurpose it. Don't worry. I have examples. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by one weekly theme. So you can easily save 2 to 3 hours per week when you decide to use one theme for your content and repurpose some of those ideas for other types of content. Again, we're working smarter and not harder. So I wanted to give you an example. I'll have an idea for the Proffitt Podcast. This is my show that comes out every single Tuesday. I'll have an idea and then I'm like, you know what? I think I could use this for a YouTube video. And then from there, I'll create a plan to use a weekly theme and talk about the same thing on all the platforms. So I will post it on the podcast. I'll put it in a YouTube video. I'll put it as my podcast show notes or my blog post. Then I'll share it on Instagram. Then I'll talk about it in my email newsletter. But this brings up a sore spot for a lot of people. And I'm going to ask you this question. I want you to be honest, okay? Are you worried you're bugging your audience when you talk about the content on every one of your platforms? Okay, give me a yes. Just be really honest with me. If this is because people tell me this all the time. They're like, Crystal, I'm being annoying. I feel like I'm bugging my audience by telling them, hey, I have this on the podcast, but then it's also on YouTube and I'm going to email them the same thing. And I'm going to talk about it on Instagram. Why would I talk about the same thing in all the different places? I feel like I'm being salesy. And the truth is, in order to promote your content, you have to talk about it. That is marketing. And But all the things that we've talked about here today, if you do them with intention, and while you're planning all of your content, you're looking at your weekly themes and you're like, how can I, tweak this here and make it a little different here? And how can I just continue to add value? You are going to know how you can do that in those specific pieces of content to your audience. Because instead of spending so much time thinking about all these perfectionist things that you could be doing, thinking about over editing all the things that you're doing, you could spend intentional time saying, this is how I'm going to make this one piece of content custom to this platform. It's the same thing, but I'm going to slightly tweak it to make it really fit my YouTube audience. And then I'm going to tweak it this way for my podcast episode. But it's the same thing. You're planning all of it together, and it's going to make your life so much easier. And at the end of the day, when you can strategically talk about your content this way, you just save so much time. You save so much time. Like, it's one of those where, I have a chart in a second, and we're going to talk about how much time you're actually going to save. But I want to move into the final way that you can save some extra time next week in creating your content. And this is a really big one. Knowing your strengths and weaknesses, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this one might be the hardest to come to term with, because as a creative person, this is for me personally, I want to do all the things. I want to do all the things in my content and make them all unique in their own way. So I'm going to be vulnerable here with you for a second and share some of my strengths and my weaknesses. So some of my strengths are speaking, organizing, ideating, and this is why I can talk nonstop about what I love when it comes to content. I can organize, like I work for the home edit, and I have ideas coming out of my ears when it comes to content. But I do have some weaknesses that I've had to deal with and overcome, such as emails, SEO, and writing. And I know I've had this in all the trainings that I've done. People were like, wait, Crystal, I love your emails that you send out. Or you really, you taught me SEO. What are you talking about? And you are a good writer. But the truth is, I've worked my butt off on all of these traits because they were my biggest weaknesses for years. And I've invested in books and courses and trainings and tools to help me become better in all of these areas. I rely heavily on apps and software that are smarter than me to complement my strengths and support me in my weaker areas. And without these, I wouldn't be able to stay consistent with my content. So just knowing your strengths and your weaknesses can help you save 2 to 3 hours a week when you rely on resources that can help you in those weaker areas. So the total time saved, I told y'all at the beginning, it's going to be way more than 5 hours that we saved by implementing all of these and really thinking about all the different ways that we can get tighter in our content. But as you can see, when we add all 6 ways up together, you get well over 5 hours. It's over 14 hours. And I know you can do so much with the information that I've given you today. You can say, you know what? I'm going to go think about a weekly theme for my content next week. I'm going to write down all of my strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to go and prioritize everything that I'm doing today and figure out what I can get rid of over the next week.